Welcome everyone to the Michigan Historic Preservation Network December webinar, our last webinar of the year. My name is Xiaohan Bao Smith. I am going to be your moderator today. We are going to hear about the Castle Museum Archaeology. Before I turn it over to the speaker, I would like to go over a few items. First of all, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please also put them into the Q&A box. The chat box will be used to share resources or links discussed during the webinar. Both the Q&A and chat box are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse. They should pop up. And please participate in the survey after the webinar concludes. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. So if you're not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. Our webinar series are supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council and the National Endowment for the Arts. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce you our speaker, Jeffrey Sommer. Jeffrey is the curator of archaeology of the Castle Museum of Saginaw County History. His full bio is on the Zoom registration page if you would like to read it. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Jeffrey.
All right.
Please go ahead and share your screen.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm the curator of archaeology here at the Castle Museum of Saginaw County History. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Castle Museum, it's operated by the Historical Society of Saginaw County. We get our name from the building we occupy here. It's the Castle Building. It was built in 1898 as a federal post office, and it was used for that purpose up until around 1970, and then a new post office was built, and the county took over the control of the building. In 1979, the Historical Society opened a museum in part of the building, and then in 1992, we expanded it to the entire building. And so we've been here as a county historical museum ever since. So what I'm hoping to do today is just it's kind of unusual to have an archaeologist at a county historical museum. So I'm just going to share with you what the archaeology program is all about here, and how archaeology sort of fits in with the overall mission of the Castle Museum and the Historical Society of Saginaw.
No battery, please charge.
And so I'm sorry about that. Thought I took care of all the distractions. I missed one. Anyway, so this is the mission of the Historical Society, to tell the story of the people of the Saginaw region through, and I sort of highlighted exploration, preservation, and presentation of the historical and cultural heritage. I guess there's a way to turn this off. Anyway, so I've pulled those out, and we're going to kind of go through them as individually, and just talk about how archaeology fits into this overall mission of the museum. So we'll start with exploration, and for archaeology, that's really mostly field work. And so I've picked out a few of the projects we've done over the years, and just to kind of give you a sense of the scope of the work we've done in that regard. So the first project I picked out is Project 1893. And we sort of intentionally chose this project as a way to highlight or to sort of integrate the archaeological and the historical expertise here at the museum. Prior to this project, sort of the archaeology had always kind of been off doing its own thing, and the historians here were off doing their own thing. We really wanted to integrate our efforts, and this was the result. So, and this was around 2010, I think, when we started this project. But Project 1893 was all about learning about the Saginaw's Great Fire of 1893. It was a tragic event in Saginaw's past. Over 30 blocks were affected by this fire. Over 250 buildings burned. And so these are some of the headlines from that, from the time of the fire. And I wanted to point out this one in particular: the city will repair its own losses. And this is a narrative created by the city officials at that time. They refused outside help. They decided that the city would pull itself up by its bootstraps and take care of its own. And to a degree, that's what they did, and that certainly was the story that they put forward. So it wasn't an intentional thing, but our project actually kind of addressed that in a way, which you'll see in a moment. So here's a map that shows the path of the fire, the extent of the fire. It started over here on Ojibwe Island, known as the Middle Grounds at that time. It was a really windy day in May 1893, and once the fire started at this abandoned lumber mill, it quickly spread. It caught a bridge on fire nearby and then spread into the city, and there was just no controlling it at that time. And our project area was right here in this corner. So right kind of in the center of the fire, the burned over area. Here's an image from the time of an ice house that was burnt by the fire, and then sort of one of the neighborhood areas. You can just see the total devastation. And so around 2010, we got permission to do some testing on a vacant lot in the city, again, right in the heart of that burned over area. And so we just started by digging a few test holes, some shovel tests we call them, just small 50-centimeter square holes. We dug a few of them and kind of got lucky. In our fourth hole, we came down on a brick and mortar foundation, and we were pretty quickly able to trace that foundation and get the outline of a house. And there was ample evidence that house had burnt. And we opened up some larger excavation units you can see here and here. We couldn't trace the foundation in this area, and we realized that was because a subsequent house was built on that location. And that becomes important. That house was built sometime around 1913, 1916 in that time frame. The project was a great opportunity for students and volunteers to learn about archaeology, and it was also being sort of centrally located in the city. We had lots of passersby stopping and asking questions, and gave us a chance to really interact with the community and teach folks about archaeology and history as it's happening on site. And then one of the other really neat things that happened is there were one or two newspaper articles about our project at that time. And in those articles, it was mentioned the McMaster family was the name of the family who lived at this house during the fire. And one day, a small group of people came up and started talking to us, and we found out that they were descendants of the McMaster family that still lived in the area. And so we were able to share stories of their family history, and they shared stories with us. And then eventually, when we did an exhibit in the museum on this project, we were able to borrow some family heirlooms, objects owned by the people who went through this fire. So it kind of rounded out the picture a little bit. And so that was kind of a happy coincidence that happened. There's just a few of the artifacts we found, some melted marbles here, some ceramic toys. This was a grouping of stoneware crocks, and in this large crock here, inside it, it had broken on the top during the fire, but down inside it there was a tether weight, which is this heavy metal object here. It's like an anchor for a horse or a horse and carriage. But we think that in this context in which we found it, inside this crock, it was probably being used as a weight to hold a lid down on the crock when making sauerkraut or something like that. Just a few more of the artifacts. You can see the intense heat melting the bottles. And then personal items as well, some kind of poignant things, a St. Christopher's medal and a necklace pendant there. And then this is what the excavation block looked like when we were down at the floor of the basement. And it helped us sort of interpret the site and the sort of sequence of events following the fire. You have the burned ash and the charred material, and there are all kinds of melted artifacts and burnt artifacts in that layer. That's the stuff that fell into the basement or was already in the basement during the fire. Then there's this thick layer of rubble, and that was from the cleanup after the fire, when all the brick foundations that were above ground and sort of the debris that had fallen to the sides. It was all just pushed into this basement as a way to get rid of the material, but also as a way to fill in that hole that would have been left. And then on top of that, there was a layer just of clay fill that had been put in to finally fill in the pit and smooth out the landscape. So the cleanup was complete at that point, and as we were working, we had assumed that this had all happened relatively rapidly after the fire, after the devastation. The stories that were put out was that Saginaw was able to recover quickly and thrive. And so we kind of assumed that this was an immediate sort of sequence of events. But some of the things we found kind of changed our opinion on that. And so here's a slide that shows immediately after we got through that heavy clay layer, we came down onto, we started getting into that brick and rubble layer. But on top of that, even there were objects like these sewer pipes, these ceramic sewer pipes or drain pipes, and bed springs and metal, scrap metal objects here. And this object right here is we found two of these. These are large dry cell batteries. And these, it turns out, were first marketed and made available to the public in 1896. And so they couldn't have been deposited at the time of the fire. It had to be several years later at the earliest. And we suspect that this top layer just below that clay fill accumulated over a period of several years. And so what it looks like happened is that the rubble was pushed right after the fire. The rubble was pushed into the basement, but it wasn't filled completely, and so it sort of existed as an eyesore and a trash dump for several years, perhaps as long as a decade, until the next house was built on the property, and then that clay fill was from the excavation of the basement of the subsequent house. So well, it looks like parts of Saginaw did recover quickly. The story wasn't the same for all areas of the city, and certainly for all people in the city. So it was a long, slow struggle for many. Okay, so that's one project, Project 1893. Another one that we did after that was the Stelzried farm site, and this is the location where, according to Stelzried family history, Henry and Catherine Stelzried came to Michigan. They settled here in 1838, built a log cabin on the site. They started a family and started a farm. And then in 1848, built a frame house, and that frame house is still standing on the property. And so one of the reasons that we chose this project was that this kind of represents sort of this 1838 is sort of the tail end of the first wave of real wave of immigration into this area, and sort of the development of the city of Saginaw and the surrounding communities. And it also happened right at the time of the panic, or just following the panic of 1836-37, when sort of that initial immigration had really dropped off and people were dispersing. All the financial situation was really bad. There was no more investments in Saginaw, and so the population was actually decreasing. And yet these folks were moving in and making a go of it during these really tough times. And they stuck it out, and they, ultimately were had a successful farm in life. So that's one of the reasons. The museum also had a kind of a museum family connection. Ralph Strobel, pictured here, was a founding member of the Historical Society. He was a charter member of the Michigan Archaeological Society. At one point, he was named the official historian of Saginaw County by the Saginaw leaders, I guess. I'm not sure exactly who named him that, but he was known widely as sort of the Saginaw's historian. He also happened to be the Steltrieds were his maternal grandparents. And so he spent a lot of time at this site growing up. And as an avocational archaeologist, as an adult, he did some testing and apparently found the location of the original log cabin, and then passed on that information to the present day landowner, who is Chuck and Karen Hoover. And along with the sort of the story of exactly where the cabin was supposed to be located, he had some artifacts, some chinking especially, that he had found when he did his test excavations. So we thought this would be kind of an easy, straightforward project. We knew exactly where the cabin was supposed to be. We thought we'd go out there and just find it. Here's a map from Plat Map 1877 showing the city boundaries here, the city limits, and the Steltried farm is located right here. It extends down in this area. Interestingly, no structures are shown on this map or in the subsequent 1896 plat map. We know the buildings were there. However, it was built in 1848. This is a 1910 image showing the original frame house and sort of the 1870s additions onto that house. And then a more recent photo, aerial image. The cabin was supposed to be located right in this area, out near the road between these two driveways. And there's even a slight depression in the ground there. So we thought we knew precisely where that log cabin should be. Chuck Hoover, when we started working out there, also mentioned that there was a pattern in the grass in the summer, when it gets really dry, the grass starts to die. And you can even kind of see it on this picture, a rectangular pattern. And he always thought there might be some sort of a structure there. So something interesting we might want to look at. Our initial excavations out there that we did, we found, this was right in the area where the cabin was supposed to be, a disturbed sort of topsoil layer that looks a lot like a plow zone, and then a relatively undisturbed sandy subsoil. We found no evidence whatsoever of a structure, no foundation or cellar or anything like that. We did, however, find some artifacts and some ceramics in particular that appeared to be mid-19th century. So we had some material from the right time frame, just no evidence of the cabin itself. Some other things, square nail, cow bone here, even some flakes, Bayport chert flakes from earlier prehistoric indigenous inhabitants in the area. So we decided to turn our attention to the area up closer to the house, the existing house, to see if there was anything in that, that pattern of grass, that dying back, meant anything. So we started excavations and quickly found this really nice stone cobble and mortar foundation. Lots of artifacts around this foundation. This is a harrow spike from a early sort of like a plow-like implement, a wrench. So I'm not even sure we never did figure out what this was. But a variety of all different types of artifacts, some ceramics and glass. This is a whetstone. But everything seemed to really post-date that cabin period. Everything was late in the 19th century into the 20th century, it looked like. This bottle, for example, this style of bottle wasn't made till after 1880. This was a really interesting object. It was kind of a mystery for us. It took us quite some time to figure out what it is, but eventually we did figure it out. It's a bucket or a disc from a chain pump. And so there's the these are the discs, or the buckets are kind of linked together in a chain, and they're sort of wound around here down into the water, and they get pulled up through a tube. And as they do, they push the water up and out into the vessel. And in fact, they had a chain pump on the site, as this picture shows. And our excavations were right back in this area by the saplings. So just kind of a neat artifact that we found. But again, nothing in this area appeared to date to the cabin period we were interested in. So, oh, this is where that pump is, and the base of that pump is still there. This is the pump we saw in the photograph looking in this direction. But we decided that this wasn't, we weren't going to find anything relevant to that original cabin site in this area. So we turned back to the area we had initially started working in, where the cabin was thought to be, and expanded our work in that area. And just like the fire of 1893 site, this was a great opportunity. We had lots of volunteers and students out there working. And again, we were in an area this time in the township where lots of people were walking by, and they could come and visit and see what we were doing, and we could kind of share what archaeology is all about and what we were learning with the public. So that's always fun. And our work paid off as we expanded our area. Eventually, our excavation area. Eventually, we came down on this dark stain, and archaeologists are always excited when we find dark stains in the soil. It usually means there was a hole or a pit of some kind was dug there, some sort of disturbance anyway. And in this particular case, we started finding ceramics and nails and window glass. And then we found this, and this is a piece of chinking or mortar, and it's exactly the same kinds of material that Ralph Strobel had found and had given to Chuck Hoover, so we could make a direct comparison. So when we found this, we were pretty sure we were in the right area. And as we kept going down, that became confirmed, and so we began finding some rotted timbers in the ground from the wall of this would be the cellar of the cabin, and a lot more chinking and lots of other artifacts. Good mid-19th century ceramics. This is a suspender buckle here. A lot more of that chinking and stuff. And here's kind of a composite view of the area we were able to excavate of that cellar. And for scale, this is 1 meter across here. Oh, the other interesting thing is, if you can see on your screens how there's this sort of lighter colored area surrounded by the charred wood here in the darker soil. I think this is actually the bottom of Ralph Strobel's test excavation, the pit where he dug through and found the chinking and then just filled it back in. So that was this area here. Unfortunately, this is an asphalt driveway here, and it's just really sandy soil. We didn't want to excavate right up next to the driveway and have it collapse in. And so we were really kind of limited in the part of the cellar that we were able to test. So we opened up some more areas over in this part of the site, and quickly came down on this interesting feature as trench feature. And this just turned into a good lesson or reminder that yes, it's important to call misdig so they can identify the location of all the utilities, but sometimes they miss stuff, or sometimes they mark things in the wrong location. This ended up being a gas line, but luckily we're just digging with hand tools and slow and careful, and so we didn't have any issues with that. We did find lots more artifacts, though, of the good mid-19th century things associated with that early cabin period. Lots of animal bones. We know they raised cows and pigs on the site. So not surprising to find lots of those kinds of food remains as well. And then we were able to say something about the actual landscape changes that happened at this location. And so in this wall profile here, we can see this is a meter long stick here as well. So we can see the original land surface and the mid-19th century sort of trash deposit in the topsoil level here that was kind of mixed together. And that was capped by a layer of sand fill, which is almost certainly related to the 1870 addition to the frame house that was, on the property there. And then a much later time, this clay and gravel fill raised the elevation a little bit more even. So that's 2 projects, and that brings us to the sort of a third sort of overarching project. This is kind of the longest running project we've been involved with. And in fact, we started field work in the Shiawassee Wildlife Refuge in 1999 and have been working out there every year since. So this is an ongoing project with several sort of encompassing several smaller projects. And I should say this is the wildlife refuge is located in this area down here. And the Steltreed farm site would have been up in here and the fire site over in this area. So working out in the wildlife refuge is a little bit different. It's not easy to get sort of interaction with the public out there. We still were able to, though, to get lots of volunteers and students to help us out in the field. And the first site we worked on out there was quite a bit earlier than the previous sites we've talked about. This is mostly a middle woodland prehistoric site, roughly 2,000 years ago, and there was some more recent material as well, and even a nice mid-19th, early to mid-19th century component out there. We worked on a couple of sites from that time frame. There's some images of all the volunteers working on another one. Again, primarily middle woodland. This one also had an earlier component out there, maybe 3,000 years ago. So that was kind of some of the, just kind of expanding the time breadth that we were able to investigate and learn more about in the course of our archaeological work. The third site I want to talk about, though, is the Clooney site, and this was actually the very first site that we started looking at in the course of this overarching project. And I think I forgot to say the sort of project as a whole. What we're doing out there is we're surveying for archaeological sites and monitoring archaeological sites that we know are eroding out into the river or caused by other forms of erosion, are being exposed by other forms of erosion. And so that was sort of the initial impetus to go out there. And this Clooney site was one of the first sites that we found and knew and started monitoring. And that was, again, was in 1999. Then in around 2004, 2005, based on the things that we found eroding out, being naturally exposed, we decided to do some shovel testing in an area, and quite a large area. And so all of these little squares represent individual shovel tests. And we began finding lots of material from the late prehistoric period. And this is roughly 1400 to 1650. So this is the couple of centuries just prior to European contact in this area. And there's a couple of things interesting about that. One is that even today, but certainly when we started our work out there, we have very little archaeological evidence of what was going on at that time. And so this was a real opportunity to start filling in some of the gaps in our knowledge about, what were people doing in the Saginaw Valley in those centuries. And so, again, we opened up several excavation units, and this all occurred over a period of from 2005 to 2013, I think was our last year out there. So it's not just the time period that's interesting. Some of the things we were finding were kind of cool. There were several trash pits and other features, and there was just really excellent preservation in some of these trash pits. And so we have all kinds of plant and animal remains in particular, literally hundreds of thousands of bone fragments, most of which are fish. You can see there's sturgeon and walleye and suckers and basically every kind of fish in the river, and all the animals in the surrounding area are represented at least in some way in these features. But there are also really interesting plant remains, including cultivated plants. And down here we've got some corn cobs and kernels. We have a couple of beans that we found on the site. And then several chenopodium seeds, and chenopodium is goosefoot or lamb's quarter, I think, are some of the common names for it. But this is a native starchy seeded plant that was actually domesticated in areas of the Midwest thousands of years ago, but was used for over a period of thousands of years as well. But some of these seeds from the Clooney site were looked at by an ethnobotanist and determined to show characteristics not of completely domesticated species, of the completely domesticated known varieties of Chenopodium, but not the wild type either, some intermediate characteristics. And so it looks like this is sort of a semi-domesticated variety, but certainly something that was intentionally cultivated here at the Cluny site, and similar seeds have been found at least one other site in the Saginaw area. And then one final thing I wanted to indicate about this site is I talked about the trash pit features. This orange one over here is actually a cooking hearth, but here's another trash pit. And in this feature, right amongst the late prehistoric grit-tempered pottery, ceramic sherds, fire-cracked rock, shell, and bone fragments, there were flake stone tools and other things like that as well. We found a few pieces of this glass bead. And so this is probably sort of our first indication of contact with Europeans or with European-made goods. And this may actually predate any Europeans' arrival in the Saginaw Valley. So again, we wrapped up this work on this late prehistoric component on the Cluny site around 2013, I think it was. And then a couple years later, Tom Trombley, our chief historian here at the museum, showed me this picture. And this is a picture of the Tittabawassee, of a boarding house and other outbuildings at the one of the Tittabawassee Boom Company's log booms. And so he showed me this picture and asked me if we'd ever found anything that could be associated with such a structure and such an operation. Because this picture was thought to be located in the Greenpoint area, somewhere in the vicinity nearby where we were working. So I thought about it a little bit, and I initially thought, well, not really, but then maybe we have found something that's associated with that. And thought back to all of these shovel tests that we had excavated in 2004 and 2005, and I remembered right down in this corner, several of the pits had late 19th, early 20th century trash debris. And a couple of them even had like really dense layers of plaster and mortar. And there were bricks and nails and things like that. Enough, and I should also say, in eroding out of the riverbank right in that same area, we had found some logging related tools like this pike pole end. This one is stamped TBCO, Tittabawassee Boom Company. So while not a smoking gun, because the Tittabawassee Boom Company was operating all up and down the river between Saginaw and Midland, certainly pretty suggestive that we could be in the right area. So we decided to open up a small excavation block just to see if we could find any evidence of that boarding house. And we found some bricks, and we found plaster, nails, and some window glass, a few ceramics, some other types of artifacts, some bones, butchered animal bones. These are pipe fragments. This is a marble. This is a slate pencil that you usually associate with school kids, a decorative picture nail. So we found things that everything was sort of roughly the time period we would expect, and that would be the sort of 1870s, 1880s, give or take 10 years. So everything was at the right time period, but not really the amount or the types of things necessarily that we would expect from a boarding house. So we weren't sure based on this initial testing, but it was worthwhile to look further, to give it another look. And so we went back and excavated a bunch more shovel tests. These were the initial shovel tests that we had dug up and going up that direction. We dug a bunch more, and based on what we found in those, opened up some more excavation blocks to give it another look. In one of those shovel tests in particular, we found a lot of plain white ceramics, like hotelware-like ceramics, along with parts of a flower pot and some other, this is a pitcher. This is actually part of a woman's shoe. But a lot of ceramics, a lot of glass and butchered animal bones, precisely the kinds of things that we would expect to find from at a boarding house. And so in addition to the ceramics, lots of glassware, and these are some condiment bottles, probably pepper sauce bottles, also some beverage containers, medicine bottles, everything really broken up, unfortunately. This is a canning jar lid and the top of a honey jar, a salt dip here. Lots and lots of lantern or lamp chimneys. These are the glass top part of a lantern, along with a few brass burners from those same lanterns. This is probably a receptacle, an oil receptacle from a different style lamp. And then lots of personal items as well, more buttons and buckles. This is a key-shaped pin, smoking pipes. This is actually a reed plate from a harmonica. So we've got lots of material. Everything we found is in the right time period for that, the Tittabawassee Boom Company operations. Again, 1870s and 80s primarily. But nothing that we found actually, we couldn't point to anything we found and say, this is, evidence that Boom Company workers were responsible for this site or were living at this site. And that was until 2023. Finally, we found this. And this is the sole of a caulk boot. And these are the spiked boots that Boom Company workers would wear, and as they're trying to walk on these wet logs, or logs floating in the river as they're sorting them into rafts and floating them down the rivers to the lumber mills in Saginaw and Bay City. So when we found this, we were kind of pretty sure, we were convinced at this point that not only is this a boarding house, this is a Boom Company operation, and we were actually in the right spot. But what we haven't found yet, or we hadn't found up to this point, was any evidence of the structures themselves, the foundations or trenches or anything like that that would tell us where the buildings were, how big they were, any of that kind of information. So we went back out there this past year in 2024 and opened up one more excavation block here and found more of the same kinds of materials that we had been finding. But then we also found this trench-like feature. And I don't know how else to describe it. It's sort of a straight line about 4 meters long. You can see it in this picture as this light-colored stripe cutting through the darker subsoil here. This is what it looks like in profile. Again, I don't know what this material actually represents or what this feature actually represents. It's just a straight long trench perpendicular to the river. But I think we'll probably go back out there next year and open up a little bit more, kind of chase this feature in each direction and see if we can determine what it is in fact. Okay, so that's the exploration phase, and that's the longest part of my talk. I've been going over those. But I just wanted to give you sort of an idea of the scope of the archaeological work that we've been able to do here at the museum. And now we'll go to presentation. How do we share this information with the people? And we do that in lots of different ways. Sometimes it's talks like I'm giving right now, or talks on specific sites that we give to different community groups or archaeology groups. So that's one way that we share the information. Another is we've hosted over the years, we several times hosted Archaeology Day events here at the castle. And these are usually in conjunction with the Michigan Archaeological Society, but it's a way to kind of spread the word about archaeology, both in Saginaw and in the wider region, to community members. We also have had a really big presence and ever-growing presence in the schools. And so several years ago, we had their History on the Move mobile classroom and mobile exhibit in the semi-tractor trailer here. And when we first put this together, we had an archaeology exhibit in it. And so we were able to take the truck and the exhibit around to various schools and set up and bring the kids into the truck. And so they were in the exhibit and they could do archaeology related activities and learn about archaeology. And that was really great, except it was kind of unwieldy. It was difficult sometimes to get this big trailer into the schools. You had to get the kids out of their classroom and bring them into the trailer. And so it was, and you were limited then to whatever types of exhibit you had set up at any given time. You were limited to doing that program with the kids. So we did this for a few years, and we switched out from archaeology to other programs as well. but it was kind of unwieldy. So in recent years, we kind of scaled down the size of the truck and scaled up the numbers of programs that we can offer the schools. And so now we have the time machine that our education specialist here, Christy, can drive around to the schools and take the programs, portable programs directly into the classrooms. And she's got lots of different programs, but she assures me that archaeology is by far the most popular one. So that's kind of gratifying to hear. Other ways we sort of present and share our findings is, sometimes we do tours if the site conditions allow it. We can do on-site tours with different groups or lab tours we've done several times. Well, the primary way, of course, and the most obvious way is with our exhibitions here at the museum. And so these have ranged from sort of large scale temporary exhibits in our main exhibition space. These would be up for a few months to several months, and then we've done sort of general archaeology related themes, or we've done ones like this project 1893. We had a large exhibit up there as well. And then we have a smaller but really thorough permanent exhibit on archaeology that's up all the time. And then we also try to kind of, even in non-archaeology exhibits, we try to, where appropriate, sort of sprinkle in little archaeology vignettes. And so these are two separate areas in our permanent Our Foundations exhibit that we have here at the museum. So we try to stick archaeology in wherever we can. And then finally, the archaeologists, when we do this work, we don't just dig the stuff up and throw it in the lab. We study it, we learn what we can about it, and then we write about it. And so we write, for the in particular for all the projects that we do in the wildlife refuge, we have to have permits to do that, and part of the permitting process requires yearly reports. So we write reports on all the projects that we do, and then we try to share those where appropriate. We try to share those with the public, and sometimes these are specific reports that we can just put on our website and say, here they are. Or sometimes they're reports that go to the archaeology offices at the state. And then sometimes they're, and another way we've shared things is in publications like the Saginaw Valley Archaeologist. And the museum here actually has supported me being the editing and producing this journal for the local the Saginaw chapter of the Michigan Archaeological Society. So that's just another way to get the word out to the public. So that was presentation, and now I'm really kind of wrapping things up with preservation. And how do we preserve the past? How do we preserve the artifacts themselves and the stories and what we've learned? And so the sort of obvious way is, well, we preserve the artifacts. We have a repository here. Artifacts are in the lab, cleaned and cared for, and analyzed and stored properly. So we've got the artifacts themselves properly taken care of. But when it comes to preserving the history, preserving what we learned, I think everything I've talked about all together so far kind of goes together for this preservation. It's only by getting students and getting the public and getting the volunteers, getting the community interested and excited about these stories and about the history and about the archaeology, that there's any hope of preserving anything. Our entire museum is publicly supported. And so if we want to continue preserving things museum-wide and for the archaeology especially, we have to get the public excited and seeing these things as worthwhile and worth preserving. And I guess all the interaction that we do with the public, whether it's through the archaeology or through our history programs in general, all of that goes to preserving the past. So that's what we do. That's what the archaeology program here is all about. Sort of end on this picture. This isn't a sunset picture. This is actually a sunrise picture. Some of the sites, some of the places we work out in the wildlife refuge are only accessible by kayak. And so I sometimes have some really nice, I have a pretty nice commute out to the site sometimes. And so I like to take pictures of these and send them to my coworkers here at the museum and then complain about my commute to work. But that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you so much for the presentation and all the photos and details about the work you've done. We do have several questions here, and I'm gonna read them one by one. So first question, as you do urban archaeology projects, how do you secure the location when you are not working on site?
So that's a great question. And it's always a little bit nerve-wracking, but the sort of the Project 1893 one, for example, really all we did was, I mean, we surrounded the dig area with snow fencing, I think is what it really was. Basically, we put a fence up around it, caution tape, signs like that, saying be careful. We always cover the excavation units with tarps um, and hope people will hope people will stay out and be safe. And also in those cases, we had really good relationship with the neighbor right there next to the site, and so we had people on site or keeping an eye on the site while we weren't out there. But it's the kind of thing where you secure it as best as you can and hope for the best is basically what we were doing. Um, in the Stelzried farm site, again, that was on private property. It was in town, but it was on someone's private property, and they were there all the time keeping an eye on it. So we didn't worry so much about that one. Other than, again, we always having a barrier up around where we're digging, so nobody, accidentally is going to walk into and fall into the hole or anything like that. They'd have to work at it to get in there. And our sites out in the wildlife refuge are more remote. We don't actually put a fence up around them, but we cover this. Any pit that's open overnight gets covered up with a bright, colorful tarp, something that's easy to see and obvious. So nobody's going to accidentally just fall into one of these things.
Hey, thank you. Next question. When you are finished with the excavation, how do you close up the site so that people don't return and start disturbing it?
Well, again, so the areas that we've been digging are usually on private property. We don't hide them. It's always a tough thing to do. We don't want to work in secret, right? We're not out here, just like mining artifacts for ourselves that we don't want to, show anybody. So we want to be as open about locations as we can. The sites I mean, basically when we're done digging, we fill them back in and we make it look as much like we hadn't been there as we can. But anybody who's sort of paying attention would have known, where we were. We don't try to hide the locations where we were working. Out in the wildlife refuge, again, those are more remote. But it's the same thing. We fill the holes in and make it look, return it to the state it was before we started working, basically.
Okay. Next question. How were you finding your volunteers and organizing their work?
I've been really lucky. I haven't really had to search for volunteers. It's kind of word of mouth, and I've just had people, show up and say, "Hey, can I help?" We have a good relationship with folks at Saginaw Valley State University, some of the history professors there, and at Central Michigan University. And so they've given us a steady stream of students over the years. So we've always had enough that we can keep people, that we can get stuff done and keep people busy at the same time. So I haven't really had to search.
Okay, another question kind of related. Besides yourself, what other professional archaeologists have you had working on site?
Um, so I am the only archaeologist here at the museum, but without naming names, I mean, I've had archaeologists from the University of Michigan, from Michigan State University, from the state, come and visit and see what we're doing out there. So.
Okay. Next question. As you collect data on these great sites, are they being forwarded to the State Historic Preservation Office for addition to the statewide archaeological database?
Yes, I think every report that we've ever written has been forwarded, and you know, we want to get state site numbers for all the sites that we work at, and when we find new sites, like out on the wildlife refuge or anywhere else, we always record those sites with the state, and so we have good working relationship. Yeah, they're always aware of what I'm doing, and always are, you know, helpful when we need things. So.
Next question. Can you share anything about your funding source for these projects?
Sure. I mean, the funding for the archaeology is just comes out of the museum's budget, you know, so the museum funds these projects, and the museum itself is primarily funded through a countywide millage. And then, you know, the museum has they get lots of grants and things as well. But the archaeology is just sort of folded into the rest of the museum operations.
Next question. What is the size of the overall staff at the museum?
Oh my gosh, I should have a number. Um, 12 maybe, you know, 12 permanent or full-time employees and a handful of others part-time.
Okay, next question. So he said, so special to have an archaeologist on staff. And what current projects are really interesting to you right now?
So the current project that I've been working on and will continue is this, the last one I talked about, the boarding house site, the Boom Company, Tittabawassee Boom Company boarding house. The way it's always worked for me personally is whatever I happen to be working on is what I'm most interested in that time. So it's also interesting, you know, it's all, you know, I grew up in Saginaw County, so the history from, you know, the 19th century all the way back for, you know, 13,000 years, it all interests me. So there isn't any aspect of the archaeology of this area that I wouldn't be interested in working on.
Next question. What relationship do you have with the indigenous tribes of Michigan? Are they involved in your excavations and or research?
So they're not, we have a good relationship with the Zeeboing Society, the folks at the Zeeboing Society, the Saginaw Chippewa tribe. We have a very good relationship with them. They haven't been directly involved in any of the excavations that we've done, but they're certainly aware of them. You know, we've discussed them with them at different times. They did a site visit. Some members from the Zeeboing Society did a site visit out to the site on the wildlife refuge where I was working this year. Unfortunately, I couldn't be out there when they visited, so representatives from the Fish and Wildlife department took them out there, and we tried scheduling 2 or 3 times a follow-up visit, and we weren't able to get it done this year. But I'm sure they'll be out again in the past. And we've gone through the NAGPR process with things that we had here in the past. And we worked closely with them on that. And they've been involved in several of the exhibits that we put together here at the museum as well. But in terms of the actual field work, they have not really been involved.
Thank you. Next question. Saginaw has many wonderful historic residential and commercial districts listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Are there archaeological sites within any of the districts that are being interpreted along with the above ground resources?
I don't think so. None that I'm aware of at this point, anyway. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's every property on the register. I don't say every, but probably almost all of them would have an important archaeological context on site. Few of them have probably been looked at that way, though.
Okay, I think we have one last question. The Tittabawassee River moves around a lot, doesn't it? Did you ever find artifacts leaching out from the banks?
Yeah, we absolutely do. And in fact, I mean, and really that's that was sort of the impetus for our entire project out in the wildlife refuge, was because of the way the river flows and erodes the banks in certain areas, that does cause exposure of archaeological sites. And so that's why we started our project to begin with, to kind of record those locations and to sort of preserve, when important artifacts do erode out, we would like to be able to record that and preserve that information. And so that's kind of how we started the project, to begin with. And then in more recent years, it's not been so much searching for archaeological sites out there as just kind of monitoring the sites that we already know about. Having said that, we did find a new location just this year, so 20 some years later, it's still new things are still showing up.
Okay, I think we have answered all the questions, and there are several comments from the audience said that they really enjoyed this presentation, and thank you so much. And yeah, thank you again for your time putting together this presentation. And reminder to everyone, this is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording when it is available in the next few days. And before I let everybody go, I would like to just quickly announce our next webinar, which is scheduled for January 16th at 1 p.m. And it's removing barriers and building bridges, harnessing the power of preservation to uplift marginalized communities. And I hope to see you all after the new year, and hope everybody have wonderful holidays, and thank you for your support, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.